الأصفياء وقدوة الأتقياء سيدنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. So we stopped last class at the issue of within what allows breaking prayer and what makes it required. And we were looking at the issue of the qabila, the nurse. So the nurse has 3 levels, just like, and the nurse would be rather like the one who fears that someone may fall over the cliff, where if there's reasonable fear of loss of life or limb or grave harm, then it would be obligatory to break the prayer, right? To delay the prayer and go, like if the nurse is outside the prayer and there's credible fear for life or limb or major equivalent harm to the baby or the mother, then the nurse or the nurse or the midwife or the doctor, if there's one person, then they would be if they're not in prayer, they would be allowed there, they would be required there to delay the prayer beyond its time. Let's say, people went hiking with a pregnant lady, and she goes into labor, and it's very complicated. So Dr. Zubaydah has to attend to her, because if she doesn't, there's this kind of fear, it would be obligatory for her to delay the prayer. If she's praying and a complication arises like that, says, okay, look, hold on a second, let me pray. And then suddenly they're screaming, something that would, for the person who has that expertise, that now there's fear for loss of life, reasonable fear of loss of life, limb, or equivalent harm, it would be obligatory to break the prayer and attend to her. If there is distress, then that's where, but distress without fear for life, limb, or harm, but there's distress, then there'd be an allowance. And this is in the case where there's only one person to attend to them. One person is assisting in the birth, nurse, midwife, doctor. If there's distress, then distress without harm. So if you're providing comfort, whatever, then la ba's, the meaning that you have to consider, but you could delay the prayer or you could break the prayer. Just cry, I can't deal with the pain. That's like eating hot chili. I'll get you a glass of water, but honestly, just sit there and bear with the pain, you'll survive. Eating even extremely hot chili it doesn't normally kill somebody unless you have a medical condition. It might make you sweat, might give you diarrhea, there's a lot of things, but it won't kill you. I've been doing a little bit of research on hot sauces for the purpose of this class. What happens under extreme pain? Nothing. Just deal with it, okay? And it hurts, let it. Unless the hurt is considered a harm, but it does establish permissions. Okay. But outside of that, just because you're delivering a child does not allow you as a doctor, nurse, or midwife to miss the prayer. Person's in labor, kid is popping in and out, let's just say it's in that phase. Okay, just give me a minute, pray, put it back, she's going to survive. Now if she's in distress, then maybe you could delay it. I mean, of course, if you assume that the time's going to go out. Normally in situations like this, you partner That one person attends, one person prays, and you switch. Right? So doctors and others, they need to be familiar with the ahkam al-shar'iyya related to what they're doing. And people do it all the time. Right. And likewise for the mother is obligated to pray. Even she is no longer accountable for praying once she becomes nufasa, which is when more than half the child comes out. But if less than half of the child has come out, or the child's coming out now, and she's not in distress, if she's in distress, to be allowed to delay. If there's fear of hardship, if there's fear of harm to the child, it would not be allowed for her to pray if it would affect the child. If there's serious distress, then that would give la ba's, that she could delay the prayer. If there isn't, it's okay, it's going smoothly, then she has to pray. Unless she's reasonably sure that the child will fully come out before the end of the prayer time. Then, because what counts at the end of the time, you would be excused because of the end of the time. However, you missed out on the opportunity. Because say, مَا تَعَلَّقَ بِالْوَقْتِ فَالْعِبْرَةُ بِآخِرِهَا. That which relates to time, what counts is the end of it. Like كالمسافر إذا أقام, right, etc., etc. أو مدة المسح للماسح على الخفين, or the duration of wiping for the one who wiped over their khufs, if the permission of wiping still remained and the resident became a traveler, what counts is the fact that before it ended, they're now a traveler. So that's what counts. Okay. I just wanted to unpack that a little more. Between Nur al-Idah and the Imdad and even the Maraqi, this area could do with a little more reinforcement, right? So we've tried to clarify that somewhat. You can find the same issue discussed, as mentioned in Hashid ibn Abdin, etc., but with a lot of brevity, but others have unpacked it as well. You can look at Nihayat al-Murad, you can look in the commentaries on Sharh al-Munya, you can look in al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, etc. This is Hasan, and this is what the Mashayikh do explain. Also have to be careful, there's all kinds of people putting stuff up. That's what distinguishes people like Shaykh Hassan al-Hindi or Shaykh Khalid, is how consistently they hit the madhab. They have this precision. A lot of people go, there's يشرق ويغرب, they go east and they go west, but do they hit the issue itself? No. All that is decoration. Yeah. Right? As Shaykh Ahmad Tijani bin Umar said, that's not deen, it is decoration. It's decoration. It's not fiqh. Bismillah. Okay, so moving on from childbirth. So practically for a woman, if you're giving birth, it is a reasonable assumption that giving birth takes a little bit of time. You have 9 months to prepare for it, both the wife and the husband. That okay. There's labor, and then there's the delivery itself. There's two components. How will I pray during labor? How will I pray during delivery? Right? But this is where our efforts have to go. Saying what, doing a critical analysis of the Kitab al-Hadi of Imam al-Khabbazi, as interesting it might be, is somewhat criminal if the person has the capacity to help people in the practical daily life. The concern of the ulama is, where are the gaps in what people need? In their fiqh, in their imaniyat, in their amaliyat, in their akhlaqiyat, in the areas of living deen. And you address those by the order of priority, by the darar al-jahl, by those things. Right? Right? The fact that you're interested in Sahib al-Mughni's Shamil in Maturidi Aqidah, that's just curiosity. And a little bit of curiosity is okay, but if it busies you from what's more important, it's very harmful. I'm not recommending that book necessarily to anybody. I just got it. I've just got it because it's got the Arabic text in it. So don't make qiyas on it. Okay, and no offense to the person. It may be a good addition. So in that case, what does a woman do? If we just summarize that, just so we're clear about it. During labor, a woman remains morally responsible for the prayer. And here you would ask yourself, we covered the shurut wujub as-salah and shurut sihhat as-salah. Do I know them like they're right in front of me? If I do, thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, but review anyways, because al-hifdhu kha'in, because memory is treacherous. Right? And you should know why a woman in pregnancy, they didn't make any exception. Because the khitab relates to those morally responsible. I don't say if you pray, but if you're tired, you don't have to. If you feel that you have an excuse, because deen is not based on feelings, but it is, but there are qawaid of haraj. But ittifaqan, labor does not absolve a woman of praying. Delivery does not absolve a woman of praying. The moral responsibility to pray remains until you enter into a state of nifas. What is the definition of nifas? Damun ya'qubu. You have to speak loud. دم يخرج عقب الولادة أو خروج أكثر الولد. Correct? No? What does it say in Nur al-Idah? What? Okay. Right? So that's why there are essential elements of the Maraqi, the Hadiyah, that one just has to know. دم يعقو خروج الولد أو أكثره. Right? And what counts, if it comes out normally, is the sadr. ولو خرج متقطعا. Even if the child comes out in pieces. If most of the child has come out, which would happen, for example, if there's an abortion. An abortion happens, and sometimes happens to save the life of the mother. Dealt with many cases like this. Normal. Like, after all, you don't feel emotional about those things. Kid died. People are dying all the time. Kid died, adult died, they died. Now, the duty of the person of fiqh is what do you tell them? And you give them condolences, whatever. But all that's decoration. What they're looking for you from is the hukm al-shar'i. I feel so bad about you. I don't feel anything for you. That's my responsibility, to understand what you have to say, and this is what I have to do. Right? Imagine the doctor says, I feel your pain, etc. They're not helping you deliver the child. Right? No, you don't feel anything. You have to be clinical. Oh, poor guy, look, I can see blood. Oh, no, you have to be clinical. Right? So one needs to know these things. Right? That's nifas. So until you hit the state of nifas, You're morally responsible for. You're في حكم الطاهرات. If you can pray with wudu and standing, you must do so. If you can not pray standing, then you pray sitting on the ground with prostration. If you cannot do that, then you pray with head movements. If you cannot make wudu by yourself, you make tayammum. It is rare that you won't be able to make tayammum and pray with head movement. During that state, any sounds that you emit or any motions that happen that are beyond your control are excused. The extent of the awrah that is uncovered when minimized would be excused. But you do cover the awrah to the extent possible. Because كشف العورة لا يجوز للحاجة بل يجوز في مكانه بمنزلة الضرورة. Right? Uncovering the awrah is not من الحاجيات, it's من الضروريات. Right? We do not uncover, well, I need to scratch my thigh, so I uncover my awrah. No. You need to scratch your thigh, scratch it. Let's say you got blistering pain and you're in front of people. Figure out a way of scratching your thigh without uncovering. Similarly, right? And there are ahkam related to childbirth, which the ulama explain in detail. That's one of the fada'il of the ulama of the subcontinent over the ulama of the Arab overall, partly because there's a lot of freedom for the ulama in the subcontinent, some of it earned and some of it, and there's different circumstances. So they've dedicated, and they've not had the fitna of academia like the ulama of Arab have. The ulama of Arab, because of the fitna of academia, and some of it, they're stuck with it. So they go into, working on things like the Mughni of al-Khabbazi and so on. If nobody ever edited the Mughni of al-Khabbazi, we still have Hanafi Usul al-Fiqh. It'd be nice. It's a nice book, to be honest. But they're busy with things like that, like Western academics. But the practical things, so there's great works in Urdu in these practical topics. Like in any subject, not all books are worth reading, so you have to be very selective, because there are many mediocre books as well, but they're great works, and they're invaluable. Right? And if you have any possibility of learning Urdu, the treasure chest of books in Urdu on these very practical life topics is unmatched in any language. Arabic doesn't come close to, like on contemporary practical living masail. There's nothing that compares to it in Arabic. It's just a fact. For any one book you can cite that's of practical fiqh in Arabic, in Hanafi fiqh, or in Shafi'i fiqh, we could, but you could find 20 to 50 books on this subject in Urdu. So if you have any, we should have an intention to learn Urdu to be able to access that. And the books, the great books of Fatawa in Urdu are unmatched in the 20th, from late 19th century to now. Nothing compares to that in the fiqh al-madhhabi. And there's many mediocre things, and we don't agree with everything that any of the great imams have to say, right, of the later imams of the school, let alone someone in more recent times. But those are very important works. So one should have a little bit of himma and work on it. Allah. And that's just a fact, you can check. So even during delivery, again, if there's fear of harm, she doesn't have to pray. She should be obligated not to pray if the fear of harm is for the child. If there is distress, without fear of harm, there would be an excuse. There would be an excuse. Someone says, no, I'm feeling overwhelmed, etc. Say it would be better for you to try to pray. But if you can't, that's the labas. distress without fear of harm. Someone is in, I'm okay. I'm in pain, but I'm not in distress. The asl is that you do have to pray. At the same time, you don't go making life difficult for somebody. Right? Yes, are they ready to hear this ruling or not? Right? So don't go around knocking on, don't tell your wife to go around go to the hospital, to the Muslim room, say, by the way, you need to pray. Because turning people away from deen is worse than them missing one prayer. Right? The way Shaykh Hassan put it was very beautiful, because some people challenged me on this. So I asked Shaykh Hassan, just look at it spiritually. You're just giving birth to a believing soul. Is there a more beautiful way you could give birth to a believing soul than a state of remembrance of Allah? And the best of remembrance of Allah is the prayer. So just before the child came out, what was the mother doing? And prayer is dhikrullah. So the heart finds it mi'nan. It's not an easy state. Then why not pray in it? Do the minimum prayer. Have shukr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Prayer expresses shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? What will help you be in a positive state like the prayer? Right? So, anyways, Bismillah. So that needed a little bit of explanation. That's why we wanted to mention it. So he says, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, وَكَذَا الْمُسَافِرُ. Likewise, the one traveling. Right? And the musafir here does not refer, because musafir broadly can refer to two things. One can, as al-musafir safaran shar'iyyan. Right? So the musafir broadly refers to two matters. Right? One is al-musafir safaran shar'iyyan, who's in a state of shar'i safar. Right? Someone who leaves city limits intending, من خرج عن العمران ناويا مسيرة سفر. Someone who leaves city limits intending a destination whose journey is more than the traveling distance. That's musafir safaran shar'iyyan. But musafir also refers to someone who finds themselves outside city limits. So there's hadar and safar. Hadar is someone who's within the city, and safar is someone who's outside. Because how do you get there? Right? And there's something I said, safar walau urfan, walau urfi. That's why he explains it. كذا المسافر أي السائر في الفضاء. Meaning the one who's traveling outside. Right? And Tahtawi explains this out. However, this is jari majra al-ghalib. This is in the general case that normally fear from being looted and attacked would happen outside the city, because the city is a place of amn. That's the asl. Right? That cities, al-ghalib fiha al-aman. The cities normally would be safe, but Tahtawi makes clear that likewise the traveler, this is jari majra al-ghalib. In the general case, it would be a traveler who'd fear from thieves and the like. Because in the city, if people are living in the city, the basis is that there is government and there's law and order and there isn't chaos, because if otherwise people would flee from the cities. Right? Nasallallahu al-afiyah. Okay. So this applies to the musafir, but the safar is not meaning, here is the one traveling, meaning outside, who's outside the city, but this is just mentioned incidentally. If you have reasonable fear of harm within the city, the same thing would apply. You're in a dangerous neighborhood. Same thing would apply. إذا خاف من اللصوص أو قطاع الطريق. If one fears from thieves or from highway robbers, what do they do? أو من سبع أو سيل, or from predatory animals, or what's sail? Yeah, or torrential, or like or sail is sail. Which way is it? Right? Sail is like torrential floods, like flooding. There's a flood coming. I want to stop and pray, and you're going to die in the flood. Now, if it's just you, so if you're traveling alone, there's a flood coming, I haven't prayed Dhuhr, you pray it, you die a shaheed. But you have your family with you, you can't cause them to be shaheed. That's called murder. Right? فجاز له تأخير الوقتية. It is permitted for them to delay the fard prayer. كالمقاتلين, right? Like fighters, إذا لم يقدروا على الإيماء, if they cannot pray with head movements, right? Because if you fear from thieves, if you pray standing, you could pray sitting down. So you're in the parking lot. If you go outside, you'll get you have good basis for believing that you'll get mugged. But if you could just pray, you could pray behind the car, sitting on the ground, then you must. So you apply the principle. Pray standing. If you can't, pray sitting on the ground. If you can't, you pray with head movements. And that's why they distinguish between the rukn al-asli and the rukn al-zaid. Even facing the qibla could be excused if the fear is genuine. You're in the parking lot, they haven't seen you, so you could even pray with head moves. إذا لم يقدروا على الإيماء ركبانا. Even when riding, so you're in a dangerous neighborhood. Let's say it's generally dangerous. It's not just, and you have to be careful about suburban Muslims, and in America this is a big thing. A lot of people think just because it's a black neighborhood, it's dangerous. Why? And I experienced that. My default address in the US used to be Jersey City. I used to joke with the friend I used to stay with that you and I are the only non-black people that I've seen today in his part of Jersey City. When we used to go other places, they say, where are you staying? Jersey City. That's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Just because it's the fear of the other, and there's a lot of this sort of internalized racism. And that's, or elsewhere the same thing happens. You go to a slum area, I say, oh, that's dangerous. There's 1 million people living in the slum. If it was that dangerous, they wouldn't be alive. Right? So that is not reasonable fear. That is tawahum. Ghalabat al-tawahum is not khawf. Right? You have to be careful. If one fears for thieves, right? This is if one cannot pray with head movements and ride. You need even rukbanan, riding. Walau rukbanan, right? Right. So this is pointing to the extreme, right? Why? Because at-taklif biqadri al-wusa, responsibility to the extent of ability. Pray standing if you can't, sitting on the ground. If you can, pray with head movements, but facing the qibla. If you can't do that, pray with head movements without facing the qibla, even if you're riding, but in that tartib. But the condition is al-khawf al-mu'tabar, genuine fear. Okay. وكذا يجوز تأخير قضاء الفوائت للعذر. So he mentions another issue to complete the discussion, that likewise it is permitted to delay making up missed prayers when there is an excuse. كالسعي على العيال, such as providing for one's family. وإن وجب قضاؤها على الفور, even if one has to make them up immediately. Now this is a discussion, but the Hanafis understand. So what does it say? So likewise, it is permitted to delay making up missed prayers for an excuse, such as providing for one's family, even if one has to make up one's missed prayers immediately. This is somewhat problematic, but they say has to make them up immediately. So if there's what is understood by immediately, right? Right? If they're less than 6, then one has to make them up immediately, meaning one has to make them up before the next prayer. Right? If there's few in number. And we've taken qada al-fawaid, have we not? We haven't. Well, we've taken the previous texts. Right? So if there's less than 6, you have to make it up before praying the next prayer. If there's more than 6, then بقدر الوسع. Because that's understood. التكليف بقدر الوسع. I actually asked Shaykh Adib rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi about this, and this mentioned in the books as well, right? So what's mentioned here, in wajaba qada'uha ala al-fawr, right? Right? So one has to do it. So it's like mujmalan, in of itself, you need to make this up because it's a debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How much do you have to do? It's not muqaddar shar'an. You do it, and it's ala al-fawr, bima'na that if you delay it without taking consistent, reasonable means of making it up, and you die, يغلب على الظن, يخاف, الأصل أنك آثم, then you are sinful for that delay. Right? So theoretically, you have to make these up immediately. Practically, you can't. Because like most people cannot practically pray 15 hours a day, even though Allah deserves even more than that, but you can't. And most people don't. Right? So we'll see the detail of it there. So So the delay is permitted to the extent of need, right? Of need, not necessity, right? Delaying, making up missed prayers is allowed where there's need, such as providing for one's family or seeking knowledge, right? Other things, visiting family, etc. But then theoretically, outside your needs, religious or worldly, you should be dedicating your time to making up your missed prayers fully. And delaying it is sinful. Practically, because of the idea of wusa, you take on an amount that is sustainable and consistent, and you do that and you hold yourself to it. Then if you die, if you make the resolve and you're taking consistent means to repay the debt to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as best you reasonably could, then Shaykh Adib said that what the hope is that you are covered by the hadith of the man who killed 99 people and then he killed the 100th. You know, his repentance was deemed, and this from the past people, so the shara'i differ, that your repentance is only complete when you go to that land. He only got halfway there, but he was taking the consistent means of getting there, consistent reasonable means of getting there, then Allah's rahmah prevails, that's forgiven. Whereas had this man just said, okay, I will go there, and once in a while you took a few steps there, but then you're just chilling out, that's muqassir. So practically one takes a consistent amount, one does it, because otherwise if you just tell people you have to make all your prayers immediately, so just go to work, spend some time with your family, and all the rest of your day you have to pray, nobody's going to do it. That's not how fiqh works, and that's not the mafhum from this. That's in itself, it's immediately due لِوُجُوبِ إِبْرَاءِ الذِّمَّةِ عَنْ حَقِّ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, because you have to clear your dues from the right of Allah which you've delayed. But practically, you discharge it بِقَدْرِ الْوُسْعِ. And what's within your wus'a? عَلَيْكُم مِّنَ الْعَمَلِ مَا تُطِيقُونَ. Take from action what you can sustain. Take from action what you can sustain. And we have a few answers, and some of them refer to Shaykh Adib Kallas's advice about making up missed prayers. So we'll get to that when we get to it. But this is the aspect of what is meant by making it up al-Fawr. Because some people will hear what the Shafi'is mentioned theoretically, and you can, if you are reading, you can read it. But I used to be Shafi'i, I asked some of the Shafi'i ulama, nobody gives practical fatwa on what's in the books. Because that's what the text says. You're not an angel who sends messages from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you know what it means? No, you just know the Arabic language. Right? So what do texts means? Texts, yeah. The meanings of texts, their mafatih are the Ahl al-Ilm. So anyways, this is the issue, that you could delay it for need. Right? Practically, anyone who has missed prayers is obligated to set a consistent amount of prayers that they're making up, and if they're not consistently making them up, then they're not excused. So I asked Shaykh Adib Kallas that, okay, so what does someone do if they have missed prayers and they're not doing them? He said, what we tell them, begin with 1 day a day. Make up 1 day of prayers for each day. Begin with that. Do it consistently. For 2 weeks or more, and don't miss. Well, so tell them, otherwise you'd be sinful. Then increase it to 2. Now, once you're doing 2, you could then jump to 4. Right? You could pick up a little momentum, make up 4. Yeah, each prayer, make up 1 prayer. Then bring it in at Fajr time. Bring it in at night time before you go to sleep. Do some at Maghrib, and then you do it like this from 4. Then from 4 maybe go to 6, then 8. Then most people, that's around where they can manage. That's good, because even if someone missed 16 years of prayer, if you accelerate to 8 days a day of prayer, 2 years you've made up a life, like half a life of missed prayers. And he said, and then he had other advice. He said, keep in mind that each of these missed prayers is a fard prayer. It is worth 70, 80 nafils, and it's still up for reward. Do it with its sunan mu'akkada, strive for hudur with Allah, because it's up for qabul and radd, number one, being accepted and rejected. وَتَرْكُ السُنَّةِ مُعَرِّض لِلرَّدِّ. So leaving the sunnah makes your they emphasize sunnah, makes your action susceptible to rejection, threatens the wajib, right? And it's not sustainable, because bereft of these sunnahs, the prayer, it's bila ta'am. It doesn't have, you won't experience benefit, so you won't be able to sustain it. So that's وَأَمَّا قَضَاءُ الصَّوْمِ فَعَلَى التَّرَاخِي. As for making up fasts, this is due non-immediately. مَا لَمْ يَقْرُبْ رَمَضَانِ الثَّانِي. As long as the next Ramadan does not come close. Then it's still على التراخي, but it becomes worse to have delayed it. Then there's karaha in delay. There's karaha in delaying. In the Shafi'is, kafara is required, etc. for the delay, not in our madhab, but it's not good to delay beyond that. Omar, there's something outside, just bring it inside. Sorry. Okay. وأما سجدة التلاوة والنذر أما سجدة التلاوة والنذر المطلق ففيهما خلاف. As for سجدة التلاوة, is it due immediately or not? And the unconditioned nadhr, does it have to be done immediately or not? There is khilaf. قيل موسع وقيل مضيق. Some said there is expansive times, and that's the position of al-Tahawi. And others said it's mudayyak, it has to be done immediately. The sajdat al-tilawa, performing it immediately is recommended. Delaying it without excuse is somewhat disliked outside the prayer. Within the prayer, it is due immediately. That's the mu'tamad. وَتَارِكُ الصَّلَاةِ عَمْدًا كَسَلًا يُضْرَبُ ضَرْبًا شَدِيدًا. Someone who leaves a prayer deliberately out of laziness, for example, would be struck firmly until they bleed. Now this is not struck by their parent, not struck by their spouse, right? Not struck by their neighbor. This goes to the hakim, right? Well, hakim, but also this is what's called an amr intidami, l'intidam umur al-dunya wa taysir umur al-akhirah, to regulate worldly matters, right? And in that, there are people who get zealous, and there's many people like this who get zealous in the subconscious. And then there's the ulama. The ulama generally state that they say, when lam yakun aliman bi zamanihi falaysa bi alim. Who is not aware of their times, that one has to see that would this serve as a deterrent for the individual and socially, or would turn people away from the deen. This needs wisdom of how it's applied, because this returns to siyasa shar'iyya, to shar'i diplomacy, right? Right. So the وَبَعْدَهُ يُحْبَسْ, and after that they could even be detained for not praying. The simple thing is, it's known that they don't pray. If they said, I'll pray, khalas, you leave them alone. Or according to what would be considered sufficient admission, that's it. وَلَا يُتْرَكْ هَمَلًا, and they're not just left just like that. بل يتفقد حاله بالوعظ والزجر والضرب أيضا. Rather, the rulers would check their state by encouragement, by admonition and warning, and if needed, striking. حتى يصليها, and in order to pray. And the intent first is their own benefit. Their own benefit. Number one. Number two, preventing social harm. Because the darar of tark as-salah is muta'addi. And that's, especially, we only know that someone doesn't pray because if they make idhar of it. Right? And the harm of idharul ma'siyah is not just on their own. Why? Because the nature of the human being a social animal, is that if someone sees someone doing something, they may consciously deem it okay, or they may unconsciously deem it okay. Which is why it is something that is haram to do, it's haram to look at. Right? Insofar as it's avoidable. It has great harm on both, because you're not just a conscious being, but you're also an unconscious being. And there's a treatise of Imam al-Subki about the issue of leaving prayer and why it's so grave. We disagree with the Shafi'is on the thing. On وَلَا يُقْتَلْ, as we will say, right? حتى يصليها أو يموت بحبسه وهذا جزاؤه الدنيوي, and that is its worldly consequence. وأما في الآخرة مات على الإسلام عاصيا, as for in the hereafter they died on Islam but sinfully. بتركها فله عذاب طويل بواد في جهنم أشدها حرا وأبعدها قعرا فيه بئر يقال له الهبهب. Right? And as for in the hereafter, if one, the person who negligently didn't pray dies on Islam but sinful by leaving it, and this is a major, in leaving one prayer deliberately is an enormity, it's a kabira. So they have lengthy punishment in a pit of hell that is of the most intense of the pits of hell, consigned to the believers. It's called al-hubhub. وَآبَارْ يَسِيلِ إِلَيْهَا الصَّدِيد, and it has wells to which صديد, pus, flows. وَالْقَيْحِ أُعِدَّتْ لِتَارِكِ الصَّلَاةِ, that are prepared for the one who leaves prayer. وَحَدِيث جابر فيه صفته, and the hadith of Jabir has its description. Right? And he points to the hadith, and it's there in the books on the tarhib min tark as-salah. بقوله بين الرجل وبين الكفر ترك الصلاة, between a person and between a person and disbelief is leaving prayer. Right? And the hadith is in Sahih Muslim, رواه أحمد ومسلم. Between a person and kufr, this is باعتبار الغاية, that they say al-ma'asi baridul kufr, sins are the sins end in disbelief, because each sin chips away at the strength of one's faith until al-iman yabla, faith becomes worn out, kama yabla thawb, as a garment becomes worn out, till nothing remains, and then the tasdeeq itself goes. Right? Because the iman, if it's is like a seed, but it's enveloped in yaqeen, right? In certitude. So if we now the Ash'ari said the iman goes up and down, it would diminish. We're out of respect for the Sayyid al-Hanafiya, where the Hanafi say iman itself is a singular, it is enveloped in yaqeen. The yaqeen diminishes. So what the Shafi'is, what the Ash'ari say goes down, it's just the degree of certitude going down. But same thing, there's something diminishing. But once the certitude just goes, because then what's left to go? Nasallallahu al-afiyah, right? The iman itself. But that's, how does one apply this in a particular context? Shawirul hukama, the Prophet ﷺ, consult the wise. What do the ulama of any age or any place say about how these ahkam are to be applied? Right? And we have to be cognizant that our ummah has been through, in the period of colonization and beyond, has gone through a lot that has systematically distanced many of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ from their deen. Right? So just taking these rulings and say, okay, tomorrow in Pakistan we're going to apply this to all this is, do a census, and if we could see, okay, test who prays and doesn't, and then everyone doesn't, let's do this to them. That's not what the senior ulama say to do, whether there or in Syria. There's, been systematically imposed secularization in places like that for a long time. So the ruling is what it is, and it's in the preservation of the public interest. How do we restore a state where the overwhelming majority of the society is praying and wants to pray, and those who drift are, one of the great scholars of the subcontinent, the way he put it, is that the condition for tadheeb, of warning and firmness, and these admonitory tools of our deen, the condition for it is ta'zeem, is when there's deep respect. Someone has disrespect but they're lazy, you warn them, say, oh, sorry, and they get back to it. But when there isn't ta'zeem, and you deal with people with tadheeb, with warning and sternness, they'll flee the deen. So he said, Zamanuna or Asruna, Zamanuna Zamanu Targhib. Our age is an age of encouragement. La Zamana Targhib, not an age of warning. If you just focus on warning and firmness, they'll flee. The ruling is what it is. We have to restore the state where the ruling can be applied with mercy, with justice, mercy and wisdom. Right? وَكَذَا تَارِكُ صَوْمِ رَمَضَانِ. Likewise, the one who leaves fasting Ramadan, كَسَلًا يُضْرَبُ كَذَلِكَ. They're also struck. وَيُحْبَسْ حَتَّى يَصُومُ. And they're imprisoned until they pray. وَلَا يُقْتَلْ بِمُجَرَّدِ تَرْكِ الصَّلَاةِ وَالصَّوْمِ مَعَ الْإِقْرَارِ بِفَرْضِيَتِهِمَا إِلَّا إِذَا جَحَدَ. And they're not killed for leaving the prayer, if by merely leaving the prayer or fasting, if they admit that they're obligatory, unless they deny the obligation of prayer. Meaning افتراض الصلاة أو الصوم لإنكاره ما كان معلوما من الدين إجماعا. Because they are thereby denying that which is necessarily known to be of the religion by consensus. Okay, this is what's known as المعلوم من الدين بالضرورة. This comes up in in جوهرة التوحيد. The definition of المعلوم من الدين بالضرورة is given with great precision by علاء الدين عابدين in the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyya. It's good to summarizing from his father's Hashia. And of the Hanafi scholars, one of the late scholars, also great theologians, but also great faqih, Sidi Abdul Ghani Nabulsi has a very nice definition of it in his Sharh on Ida'at al-Dujunna, Ra'ihatul Jannah fi Sharh Ida'at al-Dujunna. And the concept of al-Ma'lum bil-Darura comes up in the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya, and both Sidi Abdul Ghani and Nabulsi in his commentary and Imam al-Khadimi in his deal with it very well. So if one wants to get the issue down well in the Hanafi school, those are great. The Hadiyah points you to what Ibn Abdin has to say about it, and you can see all the discussions in detail there if you'd like. Number two, the Sharh Ida'at al-Dujunna, because it comes up towards the end. The same thing is found in the commentaries on Jawharat al-Tawheed, but those commentaries, it's excellent. Imam Bajuri's definition in Tuhfat al-Murid is exceedingly precise, right? And we would agree with it broadly, but there's some related nuances that are sort of legal nuances in the Hanafi school. You can find that in Sayyid Abdul Ghani and in the two commentaries on Tariq al-Muhammadiyya. And of course, the Hadiyah points you to what's in Hashid ibn Abdin, which is Khatimat al-Muhaqqiqeen. أو استخف بأحدهما, or one mocks either of them, meaning one mocks their obligation, right? كما لو أظهر الإفطار في نهار رمضان بلا عذر تهاونا أو نطق بما يدل عليه. Such as someone who openly breaks fast during the day in Ramadan without excuse. But tahawunan, tahawun, now tahawun, you have to be careful. Hawana, something being hayyin, is not deeming it not a big deal, but tahawunan can either mean not deeming it a big deal or out of mocking it. And what's meant here is tahawunan, looking down upon it. That, like, then, but of course this is in the context of a society where nobody would do this. Illa, someone bereft of iman. Right? Sadly, that's not the case in many Muslim countries. Sadly. Right? And if you ask the mashayikh there, they'll be teary-eyed. So this is not how it used to be even a generation ago. Right? You can't say, okay, all of these are kafir. That's lack of wisdom. But it's not saying that it's okay. In our age, you don't apply these things, but you apply them with wisdom. And let alone over here, let's say if you see someone, one is they could just be sick. Because of the sicknesses of our age, is things like diabetes and stuff. Maybe they're diabetic, you make an udhr for them. But in a proper thing, they should not be eating in public. They should not be eating in public. أو نطق بما يدل عليه, or they utter that which indicates scoffing the deen, or scoffing that matter that's معلوم من الدين بالضرورة. فيكون حكمه حكم المرتد. In that case, where if you mock that which is معلوم من الدين بالضرورة, they're considered like a murtad. But this is a theoretical ruling. Its application requires muftis. You can't say, oh, I have 3 friends, but they're all murtad. Why? Because I saw them eating during Ramadan. فَتُكْشَفْ شُبْهَتُهُ وَيُحْبَسْ. Right? So their shubha, that meaning they're showing the appearance of Islam, of being a believer, becomes uncovered, and they will be detained. Right? They be detained for disbelief. ثم يقتل إن أصر. And then they would be killed if they insisted on this. Right? حبس المرتد, with the apostate. Now, how is that applied? Even the issue of apostasy, the ulama say that the real concern is, how do we bring people back? That's the real focus. How do we bring people back? Right? We don't just need to erect a fence, an ever shrinking fence. Right? And one of the great Syrian scholars was asked, what about applying this in our times? He said, do we not have enough problems? Right? That there's, okay, that's, yes, theoretically true, and we defend the theory of it. But how do you apply it? That's the responsibility of the great reference scholars of any age, that how practically would this be applied? Right? So we don't have to defend, you don't have to like recast, it is what it is. How do we apply it? That's the question mark. Right? وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.